The crack of gunfire in the night sent Theresa Turner's heart racing as she fled deeper into the pine forest, the hem of her skirt torn and mudded from hours of desperate escape. Her lungs burned with each ragged breath, the cool October air of 1875 slicing through her cotton dress as she scrambled over fallen logs and ducked beneath low-hanging branches. Behind her, somewhere in the darkness, her husband Vernon's drunken shouts grew fainter, but the memory of his rage-twisted face remained vivid in her mind along with the fresh bruises blooming across her skin. "Theresa, you get back here, woman." Vernon's voice carried through the trees, distant, but still menacing enough to propel her forward despite her exhaustion. She had escaped their small homestead on the outskirts of Bandera, Texas, under the cover of darkness when Vernon had finally passed out after his latest violent outburst. 6 months of marriage had transformed the charming man she thought she'd wed into a monster she no longer recognized. Tonight had been worse than ever before. The pistol fired at the wall beside her head had been the final warning she couldn't ignore. Theresa stumbled, her foot catching on an exposed root, sending her sprawling onto the damp forest floor. Pain shot through her wrist as she tried to break her fall. Tears welled in her eyes as she pushed herself up, knowing she couldn't afford to rest. Vernon was a skilled tracker. He'd spent years hunting in these woods. If dawn broke before she found shelter, he would surely find her. The snap of a twig nearby froze her in place. She held her breath, pressing her back against the rough bark of an ancient oak. Was it Vernon? Had he followed her trail more quickly than she anticipated? Her fingers curled around a heavy stone, a pitiful weapon, but the only defense she had. "Madam?" A low voice cut through the darkness, startling her so badly she nearly cried out. "You all right?" A tall figure emerged from between the trees, silhouetted against the patchy moonlight filtering through the forest canopy. The distinctive shape of a cowboy hat was visible even in the darkness. Theresa raised the rock higher, prepared to fight. "Stay back," she warned, her voice trembling despite her attempt to sound fierce. The man halted, keeping a respectful distance. "I mean no harm, madam. Heard someone running through the woods. Thought maybe someone was in trouble." He spoke with a gentle drawl, his tone deliberately soft. "I've got a lantern here. Mind if I light it so you can see I'm not a threat?" After a moment's hesitation, Theresa nodded, then realized he probably couldn't see the gesture clearly. "All right," she said hoarsely. The soft scratch of a match broke the silence, and a warm glow soon illuminated the space between them. In the lantern light, she could see a man perhaps 5 years her senior, with kind eyes set in a weathered face beneath a well-worn Stetson. His clothes were those of a working cowboy, practical, dusty, but neat. "Name's Caleb Crawford, madam. I work the Broken Spoke Ranch just beyond these woods." He kept his movements slow and predictable as he hung the lantern on a nearby branch. "Seems to me you're running from something or someone." Theresa lowered the rock slightly but didn't drop it. A distant shout interrupted her, Vernon's voice carrying on the night air. "Theresa, I swear when I find you," she flinched visibly, her eyes darting toward the sound. The cowboy Caleb noticed her reaction and took a careful step closer. "Your husband?" he asked quietly. She nodded, shame and fear warring within her. Caleb's expression hardened momentarily before he spoke again. "He won't find you here. I know these woods better than most." He extended his hand but didn't move to touch her. "There's a line shack about a mile from here. It's warm, safe, and no one would think to look for you there. I can take you if you'll trust me." Theresa hesitated, the rock still clutched in her palm. Vernon's shout came again, closer this time, making her decision for her. She dropped the rock and took Caleb's offered hand. "Please," was all she could manage. With surprising gentleness for his size, Caleb helped her to her feet. "This way," he whispered, retrieving his lantern. "Step where I step, it'll make your trail harder to follow." They moved swiftly through the forest, Caleb occasionally pausing to listen or to help her across a particularly challenging stretch of terrain. He kept the lantern shuttered to just a sliver of light, enough to see by without broadcasting their position. Theresa followed closely, acutely aware that she had placed her life in this stranger's hands. Yet something about his calm presence eased the panic that had driven her through the woods. After what seemed like hours, but was likely less than one, they approached a small, sturdy cabin nestled between several large pine trees. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, a welcome sight in the chilly night air. "The line shack," Caleb explained quietly. "Used it earlier today while checking the north fences. No one else is scheduled to be out this way for a week at least." He ushered her inside and quickly shut the door behind them, sliding a heavy wooden bar into place. The cabin was modest but clean, with a small fire crackling in the stone hearth. A narrow cot with wool blankets stood against one wall, alongside a simple table and 2 chairs. Hunting equipment and basic supplies lined the shelves. "You should be safe here tonight," Caleb said, adding another log to the fire. "Vernon Blackwell has a reputation in Bandera. I'm guessing that's who's after you." Theresa sank into one of the wooden chairs, suddenly aware of how exhausted she truly was. "Turner," she corrected quietly. "Vernon Turner. We've been married 6 months." Her fingers unconsciously traced the bruise darkening along her jawline. Caleb's expression darkened as he noticed the mark. "Pardon my forwardness, madam, but a man who raises his hand to his wife ain't worthy of the title of husband." He busied himself fetching a cloth and dampening it with water from a bucket near the fire. "May I?" he asked, offering her the cloth. Theresa accepted it gratefully, pressing it against her throbbing temple. "He wasn't like this when we married," she said, feeling a strange need to explain. "Or at least I didn't see it. My parents died last year, left me the small farm adjoining his property. Vernon was charming, attentive, said combining our lands made sense." A bitter laugh escaped her. Turned out he wanted the land more than he wanted a wife. Caleb nodded solemnly as he moved to a cabinet and retrieved a small tin of salve. "I've known men like that. All sugar and promises until the papers are signed, then the true nature comes out." He placed the tin beside her. "For your bruises, its arnica helps with the swelling." "Thank you," she whispered, her voice catching. The simple kindness after months of cruelty nearly undid her composure. "When did he first hit you?" Caleb asked gently, settling into the chair opposite hers, maintaining a respectful distance. 3 weeks after the wedding." "I'd burned the biscuits." Theresa dipped her fingers into the salve, carefully applying it to her jaw. "He apologized after, brought me wildflowers the next day, but then it happened again, and again, each time worse than before." She gestured vaguely to her bruised face and arms. "Tonight he fired his pistol, said next time he wouldn't miss." Caleb's hands tightened into fists before he deliberately relaxed them. "No one should live in fear like that, Mrs. Turner." "Theresa," she corrected. "Just Theresa, please." "Theresa," he repeated softly. "You're safe here tonight. Tomorrow, we'll figure out what comes next." The simple promise of safety, of not having to face the coming dawn alone, brought tears to her eyes. This time, she didn't fight them. As the tension of the night's terror gradually loosened its grip, Theresa wept quietly while Caleb moved around the cabin, giving her privacy while preparing a simple meal of beans and coffee. When he finally set a steaming mug before her, Theresa had regained her composure. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, wrapping her cold fingers around the warm cup. "No thanks needed. Couldn't call myself a man if I'd left you out there." Caleb settled back into his chair with his own cup. "Try to eat something, then get some rest. You take the cot, I'll keep watch by the fire." For the first time in months, Theresa felt something like peace as she sipped the strong coffee. Outside, the wind rustled through the pine trees, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called. But inside the small cabin, with the steady presence of the cowboy across from her, the terror of the night began to recede. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for tonight, at least, she was safe. Dawn arrived with pale golden light filtering through the cabin's single window. Theresa awakened with a start, momentarily disoriented until the events of the previous night came rushing back. She sat up on the cot, wincing at the stiffness in her body, evidence of her desperate flight through the woods. Caleb was already awake, tending to the fire. He looked up when she stirred, offering a gentle smile. "Morning, there's coffee if you'd like some." "Thank you," she said, her voice raspy from sleep and tears. She pushed back the wool blanket and noticed someone had removed her mud-caked shoes and placed them by the fire to dry. The small act of consideration brought a lump to her throat. As she accepted the steaming cup, Theresa studied her rescuer in the clear morning light. Caleb Crawford was handsome in a rugged way, with dark hair and eyes the color of a summer sky. A scar ran along his jawline and his hands were calloused from years of ranch work. She guessed him to be around 30, though the outdoor life had weathered his skin. "How are you feeling?" he asked, leaning against the rough-hewn table. "Sore," she admitted, "but better." She touched her bruised jaw gingerly. "Thank you for your kindness last night. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me." Caleb nodded, his expression serious. "I rode out at first light to check if anyone was searching the woods. No sign of your husband yet, but that doesn't mean he's given up." Theresa felt a chill despite the cabin's warmth. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "That depends on what you want, Miss Theresa." Caleb sat across from her, his manner direct but gentle. "If you want to return to your husband, I'll escort you back, but I don't recommend that course." "No," she said firmly. "I'm never going back to him, not after last night." She twisted the simple gold band on her finger, then resolutely removed it and placed it on the table. "But I don't know where to go. Vernon knows everyone in Bandera. He's friends with the sheriff, and I have nothing, no money, no family left." Caleb considered her words thoughtfully. "My boss, Mr. Holloway, owns the Broken Spoke Ranch. He's a fair man with a good heart. His wife passed 2 years back, and he's been raising his daughter alone. They've been looking for a housekeeper, someone who can cook, keep accounts, and help with the girl's education." He paused. "It would be a respectable position with your own quarters in the main house. And Vernon Turner wouldn't think to look for you there." Hope fluttered in Theresa's chest. "Do you think Mr. Holloway would hire me without references?" "My word carries weight with him. I've been his foreman for 5 years now." Caleb's eyes held her steadily. "It wouldn't be an easy life, but you'd be safe with honest work and fair treatment." Theresa considered the offer. At 23, with no family and no prospects, her options were limited. Going back to Vernon meant certain death sooner or later. Traveling alone as a woman was dangerous, especially without funds. The position Caleb described offered security and respectability, 2 things she desperately needed. "I accept," she said finally, "and I'm grateful for the opportunity." Relief crossed Caleb's face. "Good. We'll wait until dusk to travel, safer that way." He hesitated before adding, "There's something else you should consider, Theresa. In the eyes of the law, you're still Vernon Turner's wife. He has legal claim to you and any property you own." The harsh reality of her situation dampened Theresa's newfound hope. "So even if I escape him now, he could find me later and legally force me to return." "I'm afraid so," Caleb confirmed grimly. "Unless." "Unless what?" she prompted when he fell silent. Caleb ran a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. "There are places, territories, where divorce laws are more favorable to women in your situation. Nevada, for instance. But getting there would be difficult and dangerous for a woman alone." Theresa absorbed this information, turning the options over in her mind. "One challenge at a time," she decided. "First, I need safe refuge and honest work. Mr. Holloway's offer is a blessing I won't refuse." Caleb nodded approvingly. Practical thinking. "Now we should make plans for tonight's journey. The ranch is about 10 miles from here, mostly open country after we leave the woods. We'll take my horse, she's strong enough to carry us both. With luck, we'll reach the ranch well before midnight." They spent the day preparing. Caleb taught Theresa which plants in the forest could stanch bleeding and which could help with pain. Knowledge, he said, might serve her well in the future. He shared stories of the Broken Spoke Ranch and its inhabitants, the kindly Mr. Holloway, his spirited 11-year-old daughter Lucy, the cook Mrs. Gunderson, who ruled the kitchen like a general, and the diverse group of cowboys who worked the cattle. As sunset approached, Caleb helped Theresa fashion a rough disguise from spare clothing he kept at the cabin, a man's shirt over her dress and a worn hat to conceal her hair. "If anyone sees us from a distance, they'll just see 2 cowboys riding together," he explained. Darkness had just fallen when they left the cabin. Caleb's horse, a sturdy bay mare named Sadie, seemed unbothered by carrying 2 riders. Theresa sat behind Caleb, her arms hesitantly circling his waist as they picked their way through the forest. "Hold tighter," Caleb advised. Once we hit open ground, we'll need to ride faster. Theresa complied, acutely aware of the solid warmth of him against the night's chill. It had been so long since she'd been this close to a man without fear, the sensation was almost foreign. They rode in companionable silence, Caleb occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing bits of local history. When they emerged from the forest onto the rolling grasslands, the night sky opened above them in a breathtaking canopy of stars. "It's beautiful," Theresa murmured, gazing upward. "One of the reasons I could never leave Texas," Caleb replied. "No sky quite like it anywhere else." As promised, he urged Sadie into a steady lope across the open country. The rhythm of the horse's gait and the wind against her face gave Theresa an unexpected sense of freedom. For the first time since her parents' deaths, she felt a glimmer of possibility for her future, one not defined by fear or obligation. They had ridden for perhaps an hour when Caleb suddenly reined Sadie to a halt, his body tensing. "Riders," he said quietly, pointing to distant moving figures silhouetted against the moonlit landscape. "Could be ranch hands, could be trouble." "Vernon," Theresa whispered, fear clutching at her throat. "Can't tell from here, but we shouldn't risk it." Caleb guided Sadie toward a cluster of oak trees. "We'll wait until they pass." Under the shelter of the trees, they dismounted. Caleb kept one hand on Sadie's muzzle to keep her quiet while they watched the distant riders. Theresa stood close to him, heart pounding as the figures gradually moved across their field of vision. 3 men, Caleb observed softly, riding hard toward Bandera. "I can't see clearly enough to know if one is Vernon," Theresa admitted. "Either way, better to let them get well ahead before we continue." Caleb turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "Theresa, there's something you should know before we reach the ranch." The gravity in his tone made her nervous. "What is it?" "Vernon Turner isn't well liked in these parts, but he does have connections, including with some of the hands at neighboring ranches." Caleb's eyes held her steadily. "If he comes looking for you, which he surely will, your position as Mr. Holloway's housekeeper might not be enough to protect you legally." Theresa's stomach clenched. "What are you suggesting?" Caleb hesitated before continuing. "There's an arrangement sometimes made in these situations. A marriage of convenience." He hurried on before she could respond. "It would be in name only, of course, but as my wife legally, Vernon would have no claim on you, and no one would question your presence at the ranch." Stunned silence fell between them. Theresa stared at him, trying to process his unexpected proposal. "You would do that? Marry a woman you barely know? I've known enough of you to recognize your courage and character," Caleb answered simply. "And I've known enough of Vernon Turner to understand what you're fleeing. I'm offering a solution, not making demands. The choice is entirely yours." Theresa turned away, needing space to think. Marriage had been her prison. Could it now become her salvation? The irony wasn't lost on her. Yet Caleb had shown nothing but respect and kindness. He was offering protection with no apparent expectations. "This marriage," she said carefully, "it would be a legal arrangement only?" "Yes," he confirmed. "You'd have your own quarters, your own life. I'd expect nothing from you except perhaps friendship in time. And when you feel safe, if you ever wish to end the arrangement, I would honor that." His sincerity was evident, but Theresa needed to understand his motivation. "Why would you do this for me, Caleb? What do you gain?" A shadow crossed his face. "Let's just say I've seen what men like Vernon Turner can do. My sister was married to such a man. She didn't escape in time." His voice roughened. "I couldn't help her then, but I can help you now." The personal revelation explained much about his willingness to aid her. Theresa felt a surge of compassion for this man who carried his own grief, yet still extended kindness to strangers. "The riders are gone," she noted, looking across the moonlit prairie. "We should continue." Caleb nodded, helping her remount before swinging up behind her. This time he gave her the reins. "You know how to ride?" he asked. "Since childhood," she confirmed, gathering the leather straps confidently. "My father raised quarter horses." "I thought you handled yourself well earlier," Caleb said with approval. "Take us home then." The word home resonated strangely in Theresa's heart as she urged Sadie forward. After months of living in a house that had become a battleground, the concept of home had become alien. Yet something in Caleb's simple statement kindled a fragile hope. As they rode through the night, Theresa considered his unexpected proposal. Marriage had been her downfall once, yet now it was being offered as protection. Could she trust again so soon? But perhaps this wasn't about trust as much as survival. And survival, she had learned, sometimes required courage of a different kind. By the time the lights of the Broken Spoke Ranch appeared in the distance, Theresa had made her decision. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same determination that had driven her into the dark woods the night before, but this time, she wouldn't be facing it alone. The Broken Spoke Ranch sprawled across the Texas landscape, its main house rising from the prairie like a beacon of civilization. As they approached, Theresa could make out a large two-story structure with a broad porch, surrounded by several outbuildings, corrals, and bunkhouses. Even in the darkness, she could tell it was substantially larger than Vernon's modest holdings. "It's beautiful," she remarked as they rode through the main gate. "Mr. Holloway built it for his wife," Caleb explained. "She was from Boston originally. He wanted her to have all the comforts she was accustomed to." A dog barked as they approached, and a moment later the front door opened, spilling golden lamplight onto the porch. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped out, rifle in hand. "Identify yourself," he called. "It's Crawford, Mr. Holloway," Caleb answered, helping Theresa dismount before swinging down himself. The man lowered his rifle. "Bit late for you to be returning, isn't it, Caleb? Everything all right with the north fences?" "Fences are fine, sir, but I've brought someone who needs help." Caleb guided Theresa forward. "This is Theresa Turner. She's in a difficult situation." Edgar Holloway stepped closer, his weathered face becoming visible in the lamplight. He appeared to be in his mid-50s with steel-gray hair and kind eyes that assessed Theresa carefully. "Mrs. Turner," he greeted her with a slight bow. "You look like you've had a rough journey. Please come inside." The interior of the ranch house was impressive polished wood floors, well-crafted furniture, and signs of genuine comfort without ostentation. A girl of about 11 peered curiously from the staircase, her long brown hair hanging in a single braid over her shoulder. "Lucy, this is past your bedtime," Mr. Holloway said, though his tone held more affection than sternness. "I heard the dog barking," the girl explained, descending the stairs. "Is everything all right, Papa?" "Everything's fine, sweetheart. This is Mrs. Turner. She's going to be staying with us for a while." He turned to Theresa. "My daughter, Lucy." Theresa smiled at the girl. "Hello, Lucy." "It's nice to meet you." Lucy studied her with intelligent eyes. "Your face is hurt," she observed directly. "Lucy," her father admonished gently. "It's all right," Theresa assured him. "Yes, Lucy, I was hurt, but I'm getting better now." Mr. Holloway addressed his daughter. "Run and ask Mrs. Gunderson to prepare some food for our guests, then off to bed with you." Once Lucy had scampered away, Mr. Holloway gestured for Theresa and Caleb to join him in his study. It was a comfortable room lined with bookshelves and featuring a large desk and several leather chairs. He closed the door for privacy before speaking. "Now, Caleb, perhaps you'd better explain the situation." Caleb outlined Theresa's circumstances succinctly, omitting some of the more distressing details out of respect for her dignity, but making the danger clear. Theresa appreciated his tact and added information when necessary, forcing herself to speak plainly about Vernon's violence. Mr. Holloway listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly grim. When they finished, he leaned back in his chair, regarding Theresa thoughtfully. "Mrs. Turner, no woman should endure what you've described. You're welcome at Broken Spoke for as long as you need sanctuary." He turned to Caleb. "But you're right to be concerned about the legal aspects. Vernon Turner has influence with Sheriff Bryson, and technically, a husband has rights to his wife's return. Which is why I've proposed a solution," Caleb said, glancing at Theresa. "If Theresa were to remarry, her previous husband's claim would be invalidated." Mr. Holloway's eyebrows rose. "You're suggesting marriage. To whom?" "To me, sir." Caleb's voice was steady. "A marriage of convenience to provide Mrs. Turner with legal protection." A long silence followed this declaration. Mr. Holloway studied both their faces before responding. "Caleb, you're the finest foreman I've ever employed. I trust your judgment in most matters, but marriage isn't to be entered into lightly, even under these circumstances." "I agree, sir," Caleb replied, "which is why the decision rests entirely with Mrs. Turner." Both men turned to Theresa, who straightened in her chair. "Mr. Holloway, I appreciate your concern, but I've given this careful thought. Vernon will not stop searching for me not because he loves me, but because he considers me his property. The law, as it stands, supports his view." She took a deep breath. "I entered one marriage with romantic notions and found only pain. I'm prepared to enter another with clear eyes and practical expectations." Mr. Holloway considered her words. "And you, Caleb, are you certain about this arrangement?" "I am, sir." Caleb's gaze was unwavering. "My offer stands without conditions or expectations beyond providing legal protection." The older man nodded slowly. "Very well. If you're both resolved, I won't stand in your way. In fact, as a justice of the peace for this county, I could perform the ceremony myself." He rose from his chair. "But not tonight. You both need rest and time for reflection. Mrs. Turner, we have a guest room prepared. Tomorrow, if you still wish to proceed, we'll discuss the matter further." Theresa nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his caution. "Thank you, Mr. Holloway. Your kindness means more than I can express." A knock at the study door announced the arrival of Mrs. Gunderson, a stout woman with a no-nonsense manner who brought a tray of food. She clucked sympathetically at Theresa's bruises, but asked no questions, simply ensuring she was comfortable before retiring. After a simple but nourishing meal, Theresa was shown to a clean, comfortable bedroom with its own adjoining washroom luxuries she hadn't experienced since leaving her parents' home. The housekeeper had laid out a nightgown and robe that must have belonged to Mrs. Holloway, along with fresh towels and a pitcher of warm water. Alone for the first time since her escape, Theresa allowed herself to fully process the whirlwind of the past 24 hours. She had fled for her life, been rescued by a stranger, and now stood on the precipice of entering a marriage of convenience with that same man. The circumstances were extraordinary, yet somehow she felt more clear-headed than she had in months. After washing and changing into the borrowed nightgown, Theresa sat by the window, gazing out at the star-filled Texas sky. The same stars had witnessed her desperate flight through the woods and now looked down on her in this unexpected sanctuary. Whatever tomorrow brought, she would face it with the quiet strength that had carried her this far. Morning arrived with the sounds of a working ranch already in full swing. Theresa woke feeling rested for the first time in months, the safety of the Holloway home having granted her a dreamless sleep. She found a simple but well-made dress laid out for her, another item from Mrs. Holloway's wardrobe. She presumed and dressed carefully, noting that the bruises on her face had begun to fade from angry purple to a dull yellow-green. When she ventured downstairs, she found Lucy sitting at the dining room table with her schoolbooks. The girl brightened when she saw Theresa. "Good morning. Papa said I should show you around after my lessons," she announced. "Do you know how to do fractions? They're terribly difficult." Theresa smiled, warming to the child's directness. "I do know fractions. I used to teach school before I was married." Lucy's eyes widened. "Really? Then perhaps you could help me. Mrs. Peterson comes from town twice a week, but she's not here today." "I'd be happy to help," Theresa said, settling beside her. For the next hour, she guided Lucy through her mathematics work, finding unexpected pleasure in teaching again. They were just finishing when Caleb arrived at the house, freshly washed but still in his work clothes. He paused in the doorway, watching them with an expression Theresa couldn't quite interpret. "Mr. Crawford," Lucy greeted him cheerfully. "Mrs. Turner knows fractions even better than Mrs. Peterson." "Is that so?" Caleb's smile reached his eyes. "Sounds like we're fortunate to have her here." "Indeed we are," came Mr. Holloway's voice as he entered from his study. "Lucy, it's time for your riding lesson with Miguel. Mrs. Turner and Mr. Crawford need to speak with me." Once Lucy had departed, Mr. Holloway invited them into his study. "I've been giving your situation considerable thought," he began once they were seated. "Caleb, you've served this ranch loyally for 5 years. Mrs. Turner, though we've just met, I can see you're a woman of character and intelligence. If you both still wish to proceed with this marriage, I'll perform the ceremony. But first, I want to be certain you understand what you're undertaking." He looked directly at Theresa. "A marriage, even one entered into for practical reasons, creates legal and moral obligations. While I understand your circumstances are unusual, I need your assurance that you're not making this decision solely from fear." Theresa met his gaze steadily. "My first marriage taught me that love without respect is worthless. What Mr. Crawford offers is respect without demands. That seems a far better foundation than what I had before." Mr. Holloway nodded, then turned to Caleb. "And you? This arrangement will significantly change your life and standing in the community." "I understand, sir." Caleb's voice was calm. "I've given this matter careful consideration. I can provide Mrs. Turner with protection and security. In return, I gain a partner I can respect. Many marriages have been built on less." "Very well." Mr. Holloway stood. "I'll prepare the necessary documents. The ceremony can take place this afternoon with Mrs. Gunderson and Miguel as witnesses. Simple, legal, and binding." He paused. "One more thing, Vernon Turner will contest this marriage when he discovers it. Are you prepared for that confrontation, Caleb?" "I am," Caleb affirmed without hesitation. "Vernon Turner will find I'm not easily intimidated." The quiet confidence in his statement reassured Theresa more than elaborate promises might have. This man, she was beginning to understand, meant exactly what he said, no more, no less. The wedding ceremony was indeed simple, conducted in Mr. Holloway's study with only Mrs. Gunderson, Miguel the stable master, and young Lucy in attendance. Theresa wore the borrowed dress, while Caleb appeared in his best shirt and vest, his hair neatly combed. They exchanged plain gold bands that Mr. Holloway provided, apparently left from a prior ranch marriage that hadn't lasted. "By the authority vested in me as Justice of the Peace for Bandra County," Mr. Holloway intoned, "I pronounce you husband and wife." He closed his Bible and offered a small smile. "You may kiss your bride, Caleb." Theresa felt a moment of panic. They hadn't discussed this part. But Caleb simply took her hand and pressed a gentle, chaste kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was respectful and oddly touching. "Congratulations, Mrs. Crawford," he said quietly. The name struck her like a physical sensation, no longer Theresa Turner, but Theresa Crawford. A new identity, a new beginning. Lucy, who had watched the proceedings with solemn attention, suddenly broke into a wide smile. "Does this mean you'll be staying forever, Mrs. Crawford? Will you teach me more about fractions?" Lucy, her father cautioned, but Theresa smiled. "I would be happy to continue helping with your lessons, Lucy." After a simple celebration meal prepared by Mrs. Gunderson, practical matters were discussed. Caleb, as foreman, had a small but comfortable cabin near the main house, which would now be their shared home. Mr. Holloway reiterated his offer of employment for Theresa as housekeeper and tutor for Lucy. With a salary to be paid directly to her, a detail Theresa particularly appreciated, as Vernon had controlled all finances in their marriage. "There will be talk, Mrs. Gunderson warned as she helped Theresa gather a few necessities to take to the cabin. "A sudden marriage always causes gossip, especially given the circumstances." "Let them talk," Theresa replied with newfound resolve. "I've endured worse than whispers." By sunset, Theresa found herself standing in Caleb's, now their cabin. It was a well-built structure with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, plus 2 small bedrooms and a lean-to that housed washing facilities. Simple but clean, with sturdy furniture Caleb had crafted himself. "The larger bedroom is yours," he said, carrying her borrowed belongings inside. "I'll take the smaller one." Theresa nodded, grateful for his consideration. "Thank you, Caleb, for everything. I know this isn't what you envisioned for your life." He paused, regarding her thoughtfully. "Life rarely follows our plans, Theresa. My father used to say the measure of a person isn't in avoiding trouble, but in how they handle it when it comes." A small smile touched his lips. "You've handled yours with courage. I respect that." Something warm unfurled in her chest at his words, not romance, but perhaps the beginnings of friendship. It was more than she had dared hope for just days ago. "We should discuss practical matters," Caleb continued. "I rise before dawn most days to work with the hands." You'll need to be at the main house by 7 to help with breakfast and Lucy's morning lessons. We can take our evening meals together or separately, whatever you prefer." "Together would be nice," Theresa said, surprising herself with the admission. "It would give us a chance to become better acquainted as friends should." Caleb nodded, seeming pleased by her response. "Friends, I'd like that." That night, in her new bedroom with its clean sheets and wool blankets, Theresa listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling for the night. From the adjacent room came the quiet movements of Caleb preparing for sleep. A husband, yet not truly a husband. A stranger who was now legally her closest relation. The situation was undeniably strange, yet Theresa felt an overwhelming sense of peace. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she was not afraid of what morning would bring. That alone made her unconventional marriage worthwhile. The following weeks established a rhythm to their unusual arrangement. Theresa rose early each morning, preparing a simple breakfast they shared mostly in companionable silence before Caleb headed to his duties, and she walked to the main house. There, she helped Mrs. Gunderson with household management, spent several hours tutoring Lucy, and assisted with various administrative tasks for the ranch. Mr. Holloway proved to be a fair and appreciative employer, often remarking on Theresa's organizational skills and positive influence on his daughter. Lucy, starved for female guidance since her mother's passing, flourished under Theresa's gentle instruction and quickly formed an attachment to her new teacher. "Papa says you're not really married to Mr. Crawford," Lucy confided one afternoon as they worked on her penmanship. "He says it's a special arrangement. What does that mean?" Theresa carefully considered how to answer. "It means Mr. Crawford and I are helping each other. He's providing me with protection, and I'm learning to trust again." Lucy seemed to accept this explanation. "I think he likes you," she offered with a child's directness. "He watches you when you're not looking." This observation startled Theresa, who had been so focused on adjusting to her new circumstances that she hadn't noticed any change in Caleb's demeanor. Yet now that Lucy mentioned it, she recalled moments when she'd glanced up to find his eyes on her, quickly averted when she noticed. In the evenings, true to their agreement, they shared dinner in their cabin, gradually becoming more comfortable in conversation. Caleb, she discovered, was well-read despite his limited formal education, with a particular interest in history and natural sciences. He spoke knowledgeably about the land, the cattle, the changing seasons, and the local politics that affected ranching. For her part, Theresa found herself sharing stories of her childhood on her parents' farm, her brief time as a schoolteacher, and her dreams of one day perhaps returning to education. She carefully avoided mentioning Vernon, though the shadow of that marriage lingered between them, acknowledged but undiscussed. 3 weeks after their wedding, the confrontation they had both anticipated finally came. Theresa was in the kitchen garden with Mrs. Gunderson, harvesting late summer vegetables, when the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. 3 riders approached the main house at a brisk pace, the lead rider instantly recognizable to Theresa, Vernon, her heart hammered against her ribs as Mrs. Gunderson gripped her arm. "Inside, quickly," the older woman urged, but it was too late. Vernon had spotted her. "Theresa," he shouted, spurring his horse toward them. "So this is where you've been hiding." He dismounted with fluid grace, his handsome features arranged in an expression of concern that Theresa knew masked fury. The 2 men with him, one she recognized as Deputy Marshal from Bandera, the other a ranch hand from a neighboring property, remained mounted, watching. "You had me worried sick, darling," Vernon said, reaching for her. "Everyone's been searching for you since you wandered off. Doc Whitley says your female hysteria must have gotten worse. Time to come home now." Theresa stepped back, avoiding his touch. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Vernon." His eyes hardened, though his smile remained fixed. "Now, Theresa, don't make a scene. You're not well." He glanced at Mrs. Gunderson. "My wife has been unwell. Prone to delusions. I appreciate you folks taking her in, but she needs proper care." "Your wife," came Caleb's voice as he strode from the direction of the stables, Mr. Holloway close behind him. "I believe you're mistaken, Turner. Theresa is my wife now." Vernon's facade of concern vanished, replaced by naked rage. "What the hell are you talking about?" Mr. Holloway stepped forward, his manner authoritative. "Mr. Turner, I performed the marriage ceremony myself as Justice of the Peace for this county. Mr. and Mrs. Crawford were legally wed 3 weeks ago." Vernon's face flushed dark with anger. "That's impossible." "She was already married to me." "Not anymore," Caleb said calmly, moving to stand beside Theresa. "Texas law is clear on abandonment and remarriage." "Abandonment," Vernon sputtered. "She ran off. I've been searching for her." "After you beat her and fired a gun at her," Caleb responded, his voice dangerously soft. "That constitutes threat of death, which nullifies marital obligations under common law." Deputy Marshal shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Vernon, you didn't mention anything about beating or shooting." Vernon ignored him, focusing his fury on Theresa. "You ungrateful whore, I gave you everything, that's enough," Caleb interrupted, stepping between them. "You'll not speak to my wife that way." Vernon's hand dropped to the gun at his hip. "She's not your wife." "She's mine, and I'm taking her home." "I wouldn't," Mr. Holloway advised, his own hand resting near his sidearm. "Drawing a weapon on my property would be most unwise, especially with witnesses present." A tense silence followed as Vernon assessed the situation. He was outnumbered, and the deputy was now looking at him with open suspicion. "This isn't over," Vernon finally said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "I'll be back with the law on my side." "You do that," Caleb replied evenly. "In the meantime, you're trespassing. I suggest you leave." With a final venomous glare, Vernon remounted his horse. "You'll regret this, Theresa. Both of you will." He wheeled his mount around and galloped away, his companions following after apologetic nods to Mr. Holloway. Once they were gone, Theresa's knees nearly buckled with relief and delayed fear. Caleb caught her elbow, steadying her. "You're safe," he assured her quietly. "He won't try anything today." "But he'll be back," she whispered. "You heard him." "And we'll be ready," Mr. Holloway said firmly. "Vernon Turner may have friends in Bandera, but I have connections in San Antonio and Austin. If he attempts to challenge your marriage legally, we'll fight him." His confidence was reassuring, but Theresa knew Vernon well enough to fear his persistence. As they walked back to the main house, Caleb kept a protective hand at her elbow, his expression thoughtful. "I should teach you to shoot," he said suddenly. Theresa looked at him in surprise. "Shoot a gun for protection," he clarified, "if you're alone and he returns. I'd rest easier knowing you could defend yourself." The practical suggestion touched her deeply. Unlike Vernon, who had kept her dependent and helpless, Caleb wanted to empower her. "I'd like that," she decided. "Thank you." That evening, after a subdued dinner in their cabin, they sat before the small hearth, the encounter with Vernon weighing heavily on both their minds. Theresa found herself studying Caleb's profile in the firelight, noticing the strength in his jaw, the tiny scar near his temple, the way his eyes reflected the dancing flames. "Why did you really offer to marry me, Caleb?" she asked suddenly. "The truth." He turned to face her, surprised by the direct question. "I told you to provide protection." "Yes, but there were other ways you could have helped. Mr. Holloway would have given me employment regardless. You could have simply been my defender, not my husband." She held his gaze steadily. "There must have been more to your decision." Caleb was silent for a long moment, considering his response. "You remind me of my sister," he finally said. "Not in appearance, but in spirit. Mary had the same quiet strength you do, the same dignity even when facing terrible circumstances." His voice roughened. "Her husband killed her before she could escape him. I found her too late." Theresa's heart constricted at the pain evident in his confession. "I'm so sorry, Caleb. After Mary died, I promised myself I'd never stand by while another woman suffered the same fate." He stared into the fire. "When I found you in those woods, I saw someone determined to survive against all odds, someone worth protecting, worth fighting for." A faint smile touched his lips. "And perhaps I was selfish too, living alone all these years. It gets lonely. Even a marriage of convenience brings companionship." His honesty moved her deeply. Without thinking, Theresa reached out and covered his hand with hers. It was the first time she had initiated physical contact between them. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. "And thank you for finding me in those woods." Caleb turned his hand beneath hers, gently clasping her fingers. "Thank you for trusting me, Theresa. Not many would have after what you endured." They sat like that for some time, hands joined in the firelight, neither speaking but both drawing comfort from the simple connection. It wasn't love, Theresa thought, but perhaps it was the beginning of something equally valuable, a friendship built on mutual respect and genuine care. Later that night, lying in her bed, Theresa reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in less than a month. From a wife trapped in a nightmare of abuse to a wife in name only, yet with more freedom than she'd ever known in Vernon's home. The irony wasn't lost on her. Through an unconventional marriage, she had found a path to independence. Outside her window, an owl called softly in the darkness. Theresa listened to its lonely cry and realized that, for the first time in years, she felt hopeful about the future. Vernon's threat still loomed, but she was no longer facing it alone. She had allies now: Mr. Holloway with his connections, Mrs. Gunderson with her practical wisdom, even young Lucy with her guileless affection, and Caleb. Steady, principled Caleb, who had risked his reputation and future to protect a woman he barely knew, asking nothing in return. Perhaps, Theresa thought as sleep finally claimed her, there were still good men in the world after all. And perhaps, in time, she might learn to fully trust again. True to his word, Caleb began teaching Theresa to shoot the following day. They rode to a secluded area of the ranch where a fallen log served as a natural backstop, and Caleb patiently explained the workings of his Colt revolver. "It has a good balance for smaller hands," he explained, showing her how to hold it. "The key is steady breathing and a firm grip." Theresa was a quick study, her natural coordination and determination making up for her lack of experience. By the end of their first lesson, she could hit the broad side of a target at 15 paces, not expert marksmanship, but enough to defend herself if necessary. "You're a natural," Caleb praised as they packed up to return to the ranch. "A few more sessions and you'll be out shooting half my cowboys." Theresa smiled, pleased by both the skill she was developing and his easy confidence in her abilities. "Let's hope I never need to use this knowledge against Vernon." "Agreed," Caleb said soberly, "but being prepared brings its own peace of mind." Their shooting lessons became a regular activity, conducted every few days as their duties permitted. These outings gradually expanded to include longer rides across the ranch property, with Caleb pointing out landmarks and sharing the history of the land. Theresa found herself looking forward to these excursions, enjoying both the newfound freedom of riding across open country and Caleb's companionship. September gave way to October, bringing cooler temperatures and changing foliage. Life at Broken Spoke Ranch settled into a comfortable routine, with Theresa dividing her time between tutoring Lucy, assisting with household management, and developing her new skills. The arrangement with Caleb evolved into a genuine friendship, their evening conversations extending later as they discovered shared interests and complementary perspectives. Word of their unusual marriage spread throughout the county, as such news inevitably does in small communities. Some reactions were judgmental, particularly from those who knew Vernon, and accepted his version of events that his unstable wife had abandoned him and been taken advantage of by an opportunistic ranch hand. Others, who had witnessed Vernon's drinking and volatility firsthand, were supportive of Theresa's escape. Mr. Holloway staunchly defended both Theresa and Caleb against any criticism, making it clear that they had his complete confidence and protection. His support significantly dampened local gossip, though it couldn't eliminate it entirely. As for Vernon, he made good on his threat to pursue legal action, filing a petition in Bandera County Court challenging the validity of Theresa's marriage to Caleb on grounds that her prior marriage had never been legally dissolved. The case attracted considerable attention, not least because it highlighted the precarious legal position of women seeking to escape abusive marriages. True to his word, Mr. Holloway engaged a respected lawyer from San Antonio to represent Theresa and Caleb. The attorney, a formidable woman named Margaret Winthrop, who specialized in women's legal issues, was cautiously optimistic about their case. Texas law gives us several advantages, she explained during a meeting at the ranch. First, Mr. Turner's documented violence constitutes cruelty under the law, which is grounds for divorce in this state. Second, his firing of a weapon at you can be considered attempted murder, which voids marital obligations under common law. And third, the fact that he did not file a missing persons report with authorities undermines his claim of searching for you. What about the validity of our marriage? Caleb asked, his hand resting supportively near Theresa's on the table. That's where timing works in our favor, Mrs. Winthrop replied. The ceremony was performed by a licensed justice of the peace with proper witnesses and registered officially before Mr. Turner filed any objection. Under Texas statute, that places the burden on him to prove the marriage invalid, rather than on you to prove it valid. Her competence was reassuring, but the legal battle ahead still weighed heavily on Theresa's mind. The court date was set for December, giving them several weeks to prepare their case and gather witnesses to Vernon's previous behavior. What if we lose? Theresa asked Caleb one evening as they discussed the upcoming trial. What if the court sides with Vernon and declares our marriage void? Caleb considered the question seriously. Then we adapt, perhaps move to another territory where the laws are different. New Mexico, perhaps, or Colorado. He met her eyes. I made you a promise, Theresa. I intend to keep it, regardless of what any court decides. His steadfast loyalty touched her deeply, especially knowing the disruption to his life such a move would cause. Caleb had built a respected position at Broken Spoke over 5 years. Leaving would mean starting over. I wouldn't ask that of you, she said quietly. You're not asking, I'm offering. His expression softened. Besides, I've always been curious about the mountains. The simple statement, delivered with his characteristic straightforwardness, brought an unexpected lump to Theresa's throat. This man, who owed her nothing, continued to place her welfare above his own convenience. As November arrived with its shorter days and chilly nights, a new development altered their domestic arrangement. A fierce cold snap descended on the Texas Hill Country, sending temperatures plummeting and requiring all hands to work tirelessly to protect the cattle from the unseasonable weather. The small wood stove in Caleb's now, their cabin struggled to combat the bitter cold, particularly in the smaller bedroom where Caleb slept. After the third night of hearing him cough from the chill, Theresa made a practical suggestion. We should share the larger bedroom until this cold spell passes. Body heat would make it more efficient to stay warm. Caleb looked startled by the proposal. Are you certain you'd be comfortable with that arrangement? We're both adults and it's a practical solution, Theresa reasoned, though her heart beat a little faster at the suggestion. We can place pillows down the middle of the bed if it makes you more comfortable. After a moment's consideration, Caleb nodded. If you're sure, then I accept. These past nights have been bitter indeed. That evening, they prepared for bed with careful courtesy, each respecting the other's privacy. Theresa wore her warmest nightgown with a wool shawl wrapped around her shoulders, while Caleb appeared in long underwear and a flannel shirt, looking somewhat self-conscious. I'll stay on this side, he promised, as they arranged the pillows down the center of the bed. Despite the initial awkwardness, practical necessity soon overcame embarrassment. The shared body heat made a noticeable difference in comfort, and both slept better than they had in previous nights. By the third shared night, the pillow barrier had been reduced to a single cushion, more symbolic than functional. On the fourth night, Theresa woke in darkness to find herself pressed against Caleb's side, her head resting on his shoulder and his arm curved protectively around her. She lay still, momentarily disoriented, then realized she must have sought his warmth in sleep. She should move away, restore the proper distance between them. Yet something kept her motionless, aware of the steady rise and fall of his chest beneath her cheek and the comforting weight of his arm around her. For so long, physical closeness had meant danger and pain. This felt different, safe, warm in ways that had nothing to do with temperature. Caleb stirred slightly, his arm tightening around her before he, too, awakened fully. There was a moment of stillness as he registered their position, then he began to withdraw his arm. I'm sorry, he murmured, voice rough with sleep. I didn't mean to, it's all right, Theresa interrupted softly. I don't mind. After a moment's hesitation, she added, it's nice. In the darkness, she couldn't see his expression, but she felt the surprise in his body, followed by a gradual relaxation. His arm settled back around her shoulders, tentatively at first, then with more confidence when she made no move to pull away. Good night, Theresa, he whispered. Good night, Caleb, she replied, closing her eyes and allowing herself to sink back into the comfort of his embrace. They didn't speak of the change in the morning, but the pillow barrier remained abandoned in subsequent nights. Each evening, they would begin on their respective sides of the bed, but inevitably, Theresa would wake to find herself curled against Caleb's side, his arm protectively around her. It was an unspoken evolution in their relationship, born of practical necessity, but developing into something neither had anticipated, a physical comfort and closeness that violated none of their initial agreement, yet subtly transformed it. As the cold snap continued, they spent more time indoors during the evenings. Caleb taught Theresa to play chess using a beautiful set carved from mesquite wood that had belonged to his father. In return, she read aloud from Mr. Holloway's collection of classic literature, her clear voice bringing the stories to life as Caleb worked on small woodcarving projects by the fire. One evening, as they sat before the hearth after a particularly challenging day, a fence line had been damaged in the cold, requiring emergency repairs. Caleb surprised her with a small wooden box, intricately carved with a pattern of oak leaves. I made this for you, he said, somewhat shyly. For your hairpins and such. Theresa accepted the gift with genuine delight, running her fingers over the detailed carving. Caleb, it's beautiful, thank you. On impulse, she leaned forward and pressed a quick kiss to his cheek. The simple gesture seemed to startle them both. It was the first kiss between them since their wedding ceremony, when Caleb had respectfully kissed her hand. This was different, spontaneous, personal, initiated by Theresa herself. Caleb's eyes, when they met hers, held a warmth that sent a flutter through her chest. You're welcome, he said softly. That night, when they retired to bed, the usual careful distance they maintained at the beginning of each night seemed to have diminished. Theresa found herself lying closer to the center, and when Caleb's arm cautiously encircled her shoulders, she willingly turned into his embrace. Is this all right? He asked, his voice low in the darkness. Yes, she whispered, her hand coming to rest on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. More than all right. They fell asleep like that, holding each other by choice rather than chance, neither acknowledging the subtle but significant shift in their relationship. It wasn't passion, exactly, but something perhaps more profound, the gradual awakening of trust and affection between two people who had come together through circumstance, but were choosing, day by day, to remain together. The final week of November brought a flurry of activity to the ranch as they prepared for the upcoming court hearing in Bandera. Mrs. Winthrop arrived to conduct final interviews with potential witnesses, including Mrs. Gunderson, who had noticed Theresa's bruises upon her arrival, and Dr. Bennett, who had discreetly examined Theresa shortly after her arrival at the ranch and documented evidence of prior abuse. Tension mounted as the court date approached. Theresa found herself plagued by nightmares of being forced to return to Vernon, often waking in a cold sweat despite the warmth of Caleb beside her. On those nights, he would hold her close, murmuring reassurances until her trembling subsided. I won't let him take you, he promised during one particularly difficult night. No matter what the court decides, Theresa believed him. In the months since their unconventional marriage began, Caleb had proven himself a man of absolute integrity. If he gave his word, he kept it. The night before they were to travel to Bandera for the hearing, a fierce winter storm descended on the hill country. By morning, roads were impassable, streams had overflowed their banks, and travel of any kind was deemed too dangerous to attempt. We'll have to postpone, Mrs. Winthrop announced grimly after conferring with Mr. Holloway. I've sent word to the court, but there's no guarantee my messenger will get through in time. What happens if we don't appear? Theresa asked anxiously. Normally, a default judgment could be entered against absent parties, the attorney explained. But given the weather conditions affecting the entire county, the judge should grant a continuance. Should, Caleb noted, his expression concerned, but we can't be certain, Mrs. Winthrop acknowledged the point with a nod. Unfortunately not. Judge Parker is generally fair-minded, but he and Vernon Turner are known to socialize together. The storm raged for 3 days, confining everyone to the ranch buildings and causing considerable concern about the welfare of the cattle. When it finally abated, roads remained nearly impassable with mud and debris, but a rider from town brought news that chilled Theresa more thoroughly than any winter wind. Judge Parker had heard Vernon's petition despite the storm, with only Vernon and his attorney present. He had ruled in Vernon's favor, declaring Theresa's marriage to Caleb invalid on grounds that her prior marriage had never been legally dissolved. Furthermore, he had issued an order for Theresa to be returned to her lawful husband within 7 days. He can't do that. Caleb protested when Mr. Holloway delivered the news. It violates basic legal principles to hear a case with only one party present. Technically, he could justify it as an emergency proceeding, Mrs. Winthrop explained, her expression grim. But it's highly irregular and almost certainly influenced by his personal relationship with Turner. What options do we have? Theresa asked, fighting to keep her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. We can appeal to the district court in San Antonio, the attorney said. But that would take time, weeks, possibly months. In the meantime, the local sheriff would be obligated to enforce Judge Parker's order. So Vernon could legally come here with the sheriff and take Theresa back, Caleb demanded, his voice tight with controlled anger. I'm afraid so, yes. The room fell silent as they absorbed this devastating development. Theresa felt the walls of her newfound freedom closing in, the prospect of returning to Vernon's control like a physical weight crushing her chest. Then we leave, Caleb said suddenly, his decision apparently made. Tonight. Mr. Holloway leaned forward. You're suggesting you flee? I'm suggesting we remove ourselves from this jurisdiction until a fair hearing can be arranged in San Antonio, Caleb clarified. Vernon has corrupted the local legal process. We need to reach a court where he doesn't have influence. Mrs. Winthrop considered this proposal. It's risky. Defying a court order, even an unjust one, could complicate your legal position. Not as much as Theresa being forced back into an abusive marriage would complicate her life, Caleb responded firmly. Theresa looked at her husband, for that was truly how she had come to think of him, legal technicalities aside, and saw the determination in his face. He had promised to protect her, and he intended to keep that promise, even if it meant abandoning the life and position he had built. Where would we go? She asked quietly. Caleb met her eyes. New Mexico territory. I have a cousin in Santa Fe who would take us in until we sort this out legally. It's a 3-day hard ride from here. Mr. Holloway nodded slowly. I can provide horses, supplies, and enough funds to see you established, and I'll continue supporting your legal case here through Mrs. Winthrop. It's settled then, Caleb said, reaching for Theresa's hand. We leave at nightfall. The hours that followed passed in a blur of focused activity. Theresa packed their few personal belongings while Caleb prepared the horses and gathered necessary supplies. Mr. Holloway arranged for trail provisions and provided a substantial sum of money, waving away Caleb's protests. Consider it an advance on wages earned, the rancher insisted. You've been more than a foreman to me, Caleb. You've been a friend. I expect to see you both back here when this legal nonsense is resolved. As dusk approached, they gathered in the ranch yard for farewells. Lucy clung to Theresa, tears streaming down her young face. Promise you'll come back, she pleaded. I promise we'll do everything possible to return, Theresa told her, embracing the girl tightly. And you must promise to continue your studies. I expect to see great progress when I return. Mrs. Gunderson pressed a packet of food into Theresa's hands. Enough for 2 days if you're careful, she said gruffly, her own eyes suspiciously bright. Take care of each other. Final goodbyes exchanged, Caleb helped Theresa mount her horse, then swung into his own saddle. With a last wave to the people who had become their extended family, they rode away from Broken Spoke Ranch, heading west as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. They traveled through the night, keeping to less traveled trails where Caleb's knowledge of the land proved invaluable. By dawn, they had covered nearly 30 miles and crossed into neighboring Kerr County, where Vernon's influence would be less pervasive. "We should rest the horses," Caleb suggested as they reached a small clearing near a stream. "And ourselves." Theresa nodded, too exhausted to speak. The emotional strain of the past days combined with the physical demands of hard riding had left her drained. Caleb helped her dismount, his hands steady at her waist, then busied himself tending to the horses while she spread their bedrolls beneath a stand of oak trees. "Try to sleep," he urged, bringing her a cup of water from the stream. "I'll keep watch." "You need rest too," she protested weakly. "I'll wake you in a few hours and take my turn then," he promised. Too tired to argue, Theresa lay down on the bedroll, drawing a blanket over herself against the morning chill. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive as her mind churned with worry. What if Vernon and the sheriff were already in pursuit? What if they were caught before reaching the territorial border? "What if I can hear you thinking from here?" Caleb said softly, settling on the ground beside her. "Try to rest, Theresa. We've made good progress." "I'm afraid," she admitted, turning to face him. "Not just of being caught, but of what this means for you. You've given up everything, your position, your home for me." Caleb's expression softened as he reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face. "Not everything," he corrected gently, "and not just for you, for us. What we have. It matters to me." The simple declaration, spoken in his characteristically straightforward manner, pierced straight to Theresa's heart. Over the past months, their arrangement of convenience had evolved into something neither had anticipated: a partnership based on genuine care, respect, and growing affection. Impulsively, Theresa reached up and touched his cheek. "It matters to me too," she whispered. For a breathless moment, they gazed at each other, something unspoken passing between them. Then Caleb leaned down and for the first time kissed her lips, a gentle, questioning kiss that asked rather than demanded. Theresa responded with a tentative sweetness born of newfound trust rather than old fears. When they parted, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "Sleep now," he murmured. "I'll be right here." With his reassuring presence beside her, Theresa finally drifted into exhausted slumber, her hand still clasped in his. They traveled for 2 more days, pushing westward through increasingly rugged terrain. The weather held fair, which Caleb deemed both blessing and curse, good for their progress, but equally good for any pursuers. They avoided settlements where possible, camping in secluded locations and keeping a vigilant watch. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, as they crested a ridge that offered a panoramic view of the landscape behind them, Caleb suddenly reined his horse to a halt, his expression alert. "Riders," he said tersely, pointing to distant figures moving across the plain below. 4 of them moving fast. Theresa felt her heart sink. "Vernon, can't tell from this distance, but they're following our trail." Caleb's expression turned grim. "We need to push harder. The territorial border is less than 20 miles ahead. If we can cross before nightfall, it might buy us time while they sort out jurisdictional issues." They urged their tired horses to a faster pace, following a winding trail through increasingly rocky terrain. Caleb led them through a series of ravines and narrow passes, clearly hoping to make pursuit more difficult. But the strain on their mounts was becoming evident. As twilight approached, disaster struck. Theresa's horse stumbled on the rocky path, letting out a distressed whinny as it favored its right foreleg. "She's gone lame," Caleb confirmed after a quick examination. "Stone bruise, possibly worse. She can't continue at this pace." Theresa dismounted, stroking the mare's neck apologetically. "What do we do?" Caleb glanced back the way they had come, then consulted the rough map Mr. Holloway had provided. "There's a small settlement about 5 miles ahead, barely more than a trading post. We'll have to double up on my horse and make for it. With luck, we can purchase or trade for another mount there." It was their only viable option. They transferred essential supplies to Caleb's horse, then released the injured mare with a gentle slap to send her away from the trail. With Theresa seated behind him, arms wrapped around his waist, Caleb urged his gelding forward at the best pace the additional burden would allow. The sun was setting when they reached the trading post, a cluster of rough buildings surrounding a central store that also served as saloon, hotel, and community gathering place. A few horses were tethered outside, and lamplight glowed from the windows. "Wait here," Caleb instructed, helping Theresa dismount in the shadows beside the main building. "Let me assess the situation before we both go in." Theresa nodded, though she disliked being separated from him even briefly. She watched as Caleb approached the building, adopting a relaxed posture that belied the tension she knew he felt. He disappeared inside, leaving her alone with their exhausted horse and the growing darkness. Minutes stretched interminably. Theresa strained to hear voices from inside, but could discern only the general murmur of conversation. Just as she was beginning to worry, the door opened, spilling golden light onto the dusty ground. Caleb emerged, followed by an older man with a thick gray beard. "Theresa," Caleb called softly. "It's safe. Come meet Mr. Jenkins." She stepped forward hesitantly, and the older man offered a respectful nod. "Mrs. Crawford, your husband says you're in a bit of trouble. Come inside, my wife has some hot food ready and we can talk privately." The interior of the trading post was surprisingly clean and well organized, with a small area serving as a dining room separate from the main store and saloon. A plump, pleasant-faced woman introduced as Mrs. Jenkins led them to a table in the corner, quickly serving bowls of hearty stew and fresh bread. "Eat first," she insisted. "Troubles are always easier to face on a full stomach." They complied gratefully, the hot food reviving their spirits as well as their bodies. When they had finished, Mr. Jenkins rejoined them, his expression serious. "So you're running from an unjust court order," he summarized after Caleb explained their situation. "And you believe pursuers are close behind?" "Yes, sir," Caleb confirmed. "We need a fresh horse and a place to rest for a few hours before continuing to the territorial border." Mr. Jenkins stroked his beard thoughtfully. "I can provide both, and perhaps something more." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "This isn't the first time folks have passed through here fleeing injustice. There's a route not on any map that can take you to Santa Fe through the high country. It adds distance but offers safety. Few know it, fewer still would attempt it this time of year." Hope kindled in Theresa's chest. "You'd share this route with us, for a price," the older man acknowledged, though not an unreasonable one. "My son and his wife operate a way station about halfway along the route. I haven't had word from them in nearly a month. If you'd check on them, bring back news of their welfare, that would be payment enough." Caleb and Theresa exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "We accept," Caleb said, "and we're grateful." Mr. Jenkins nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good. Now about those pursuers, 4 men, you said?" "Yes," Caleb confirmed. "Likely Vernon Turner, perhaps the local sheriff, and 2 others. Well, they haven't reached here yet, but this is the logical stopping point if they're following your trail." The older man rose from his chair. "I suggest we prepare a little. Misdirection." His plan was simple but clever. While Theresa rested, Caleb and Mr. Jenkins selected a fresh horse from the trading post's small remuda, then prepared supplies for the next stage of their journey. Meanwhile, Mrs. Jenkins spread word among the few other customers that a lone rider had stopped briefly, before continuing south toward the Rio Grande, the opposite direction from Theresa and Caleb's actual route. Shortly after midnight, they departed the trading post with Mr. Jenkins's detailed instructions for the hidden trail and his blessing. Their path now took them northwest through increasingly rugged mountain terrain, following game trails and ancient Native American routes that wound through pine forests and rocky passes. "If Mr. Jenkins's information is accurate, we should reach the territorial border by midday tomorrow," Caleb said as they paused at dawn to rest the horses. "Then another day to his son's way station." Theresa nodded, scanning the difficult terrain ahead. "Do you think Vernon will believe the false trail?" "Hard to say," Caleb admitted. "Vernon's no fool, despite his other failings. But even if he suspects deception, he won't know which alternate route we've taken. There are dozens of possibilities." They continued their journey throughout the day, the landscape growing more dramatic as they ascended into higher elevations. Pine forests gave way to rocky outcroppings, offering spectacular vistas but challenging travel. By late afternoon, they reached a natural stone arch that Mr. Jenkins had described as marking the territorial border. "We've made it," Caleb announced as they passed beneath the arch. "Welcome to New Mexico territory." Theresa felt a surge of relief tempered by caution. "Vernon won't simply give up because we've crossed a border." "No," Caleb agreed, "but his legal authority is weaker here and he's farther from his allies. Each mile gives us advantage." They made camp that night in a sheltered canyon, building a small fire that would be invisible from the trail below. As they shared their simple meal, Theresa found herself watching Caleb in the flickering firelight, noting the exhaustion evident in the lines of his face. "You should rest," she urged. "You've barely slept in 3 days." "I'll rest when we reach the way station," he replied, though his weary smile betrayed how tired he truly was. Theresa moved to sit beside him, resting her head against his shoulder. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Caleb's arm came around her shoulders, drawing her closer. "No need for thanks between us, Theresa." "Perhaps not," she acknowledged, "but I want you to know that I don't regret any of this. Even now, even on the run, I'm happier than I ever was with Vernon." Caleb was silent for a moment, his fingers gently stroking her arm. "When this is over, when we're truly safe, we should discuss our arrangement," he finally said. "Whether we want to continue as we are or make changes." The careful neutrality in his tone couldn't quite mask the question beneath his words. Theresa lifted her head to look at him directly, finding uncertainty in his usually confident gaze. "What kind of changes?" she asked, though she thought she knew. Caleb met her eyes steadily. "Our marriage began as a practical solution to a dangerous problem, but for me, it's become much more than that. I care for you, Theresa, not as someone who needs protection, but as the woman you are, strong, kind, resilient." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "If you wanted, when we're settled, we could consider making our marriage real in all ways. Or, if you prefer to maintain our current arrangement, or even to part ways eventually, I would respect that choice." The honesty of his declaration moved her deeply. This man, who had already given so much, was offering her true choice, something Vernon had never done. "I care for you too, Caleb," she said softly. "More than I thought possible after Vernon. When we're safe, we'll talk about our future. But know this," she reached up to touch his face gently. "Whatever path we choose, I'm grateful fate led you to find me in those dark woods." Caleb turned his head to press a kiss into her palm, the simple gesture conveying more than words could express. That night, they slept close together for warmth and comfort, the boundary between protective arrangement and genuine affection continuing to blur with each passing day. Morning brought clear skies and renewed determination. According to Mr. Jenkins's map, they should reach his Sun's Way station by nightfall if they maintained a steady pace. The terrain was challenging but beautiful, with sweeping vistas of mountains and valleys stretching to the horizon. As midday approached, they paused to rest the horses near a high ridge overlooking the path they had traveled. Caleb studied the landscape through Mr. Holloway's field glasses, methodically scanning for any sign of pursuit. "Nothing," he reported, lowering the glasses with evident relief. Either they followed the false trail south, or they're too far behind to see. Theresa allowed herself to hope that perhaps the worst was behind them. Perhaps they had successfully escaped Vernon's reach and could begin building a new life in Santa Fe while Mrs. Winthrop pursued their legal case in Texas. They had just resumed their journey when disaster struck without warning. As they rounded a sharp bend in the narrow trail, they found themselves face to face with 4 mounted men, Vernon at the lead, his expression a mixture of triumph and rage. "Well, well," he drawled, his hand resting on his holstered pistol. "Look what we found, boys." Caleb immediately positioned his horse protectively in front of Theresa's. "How did you find us?" he demanded. "This trail isn't on any map." Vernon's smile was cold. Old Man Jenkins was very helpful once Sheriff Bryson explained the consequences of harboring fugitives. He focused his attention on Theresa. "Time to come home, wife." "I'm not your wife anymore," Theresa replied, surprised at the steadiness of her own voice despite her pounding heart. "And I'm never going back to you." Vernon's expression darkened. The law says different. Judge Parker's ruling was clear. Our marriage stands, and this farce with Crawford is void. He gestured impatiently. Now get over here before I lose my patience. The judge's ruling has no authority in New Mexico territory, Caleb stated firmly. We've crossed the border. Have you now? Vernon's smile returned, more menacing than before. Funny thing about that border, it's actually 10 miles north of here. You're still in Texas, which means the judge's order still applies. He nodded to Sheriff Bryson. Do your duty, Sheriff. The lawman looked uncomfortable but stepped his horse forward. Mrs. Turner, I have a legal obligation to return you to your husband. Please come peacefully. Theresa felt cold dread washing through her. Had Mr. Jenkins deliberately misinformed them about the border location? Or had Vernon somehow manipulated this situation too? She's not going anywhere with him, Caleb declared, his hand now hovering near his own weapon. Vernon Turner is an abusive husband who nearly killed her. No court order justifies returning her to that danger. That's not for us to decide, the sheriff replied, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced of his own argument. The court has ruled. A corrupt ruling from a corrupt judge, Caleb countered. You know Vernon's reputation, Sheriff. You've seen the results of his temper around town. A tense silence followed as the sheriff glanced between Vernon and Caleb, clearly conflicted. The two other men ranch hands Theresa recognized from neighboring properties shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. Vernon broke the impasse by drawing his pistol. Enough talking. Theresa, get over here now, or I'll put a bullet in your lover and drag you back anyway. Time seemed to slow as Theresa watched Vernon aim at Caleb. In that crystallized moment, she remembered Caleb's shooting lessons, the weight of the revolver he had insisted she carry, now holstered beneath her coat. Without conscious thought, her hand moved to the weapon. Vernon, she said clearly, drawing his attention. Put down the gun, he laughed dismissively. Or what? You'll scream, faint. You never did have any backbone, Theresa. With a steadiness that surprised even herself, Theresa drew the revolver and aimed it directly at her former husband. I said put down the gun. Vernon's expression shifted from mockery to shock, then to fury. You wouldn't dare, he snarled. I would, she replied calmly. You taught me that lesson, Vernon. The night you fired at me, you showed me exactly how far you were willing to go. Now I'm showing you how far I'll go to be free. The standoff stretched for several heartbeats, tension crackling in the mountain air. Then, unexpectedly, Sheriff Bryson moved his horse between them. That's enough, he said firmly. No one's shooting anybody today. He turned to Vernon. Lower your weapon, Turner, now. She's my wife, Vernon protested, his face flushed with anger. The court isn't here, the sheriff interrupted. I am, and I'm not witnessing a murder today, court order or no. He gestured to the other men. Patterson, Riley, disarm Mr. Turner. To Theresa's astonishment, the men complied, one of them reaching over to forcibly take Vernon's pistol despite his protests. The sheriff turned back to Theresa and Caleb. I don't know exactly where the territorial border is, and frankly, I don't care. What I do know is that I joined this pursuit to uphold the law, not to force a woman back to a man who'd threatened murder in front of witnesses. He adjusted his hat. Far as I'm concerned, we never found you, got lost in the mountains, had to turn back. Understood. Relief washed through Theresa so intensely she nearly swayed in the saddle. Thank you, Sheriff, she managed. Don't thank me, he replied gruffly. Just get across that border, the real one, and stay there until this legal mess gets sorted proper. He turned back to Vernon. We're returning to Bandera. Now, you can't do this, Vernon shouted, his face contorted with rage. She's my wife, my property. And that right there, the sheriff said quietly, is why I'm making this decision. He nodded once to Caleb. Take care of her, Crawford. As the sheriff and his companions turned their mounts, practically dragging a still protesting Vernon with them, Theresa slowly lowered her revolver, her hand trembling with delayed reaction. Caleb moved his horse alongside hers, gently taking the weapon and returning it to its holster. You were magnificent, he said softly. I was terrified, she admitted. Courage isn't the absence of fear, he reminded her, echoing words he'd spoken during their shooting lessons. It's acting despite it. They waited until Vernon's party had disappeared around a bend in the trail before continuing their journey, now moving with renewed urgency. True to Mr. Jenkins's original directions, they crossed what was clearly marked as the territorial border several hours later, finally leaving Texas jurisdiction behind. The way station, when they reached it shortly after dusk, proved to be a sturdy log structure nestled in a small valley, smoke rising welcomingly from its stone chimney. Timothy Jenkins and his wife Martha greeted them with cautious curiosity that transformed to warm hospitality once Caleb explained their connection to the elder Jenkins. "Father's message couldn't have come at a better time," Timothy said as they sat around the kitchen table, mugs of hot coffee warming their hands. "We've been cut off by early snow in the high passes. Another week and it would have been impossible to reach us until spring thaw." "Is everyone well here?" Theresa asked, remembering their promise to bring back news. "Well enough," Martha replied with a tired smile. "Though our youngest has been fighting a fever this past week, nothing serious but worrying all the same." Theresa, who had some knowledge of herbal remedies from her mother, offered to examine the child. Under her care, supplemented by medicines from their supplies, the boy's fever broke by morning. The Jenkinses' gratitude ensured they would have a safe haven for as long as they needed. For 3 days, they rested at the way station, regaining their strength and planning their next steps. Timothy confirmed that the route to Santa Fe remained passable, though challenging, and offered to guide them personally as far as the next settlement. On the evening before their planned departure, Theresa and Caleb walked along a ridge near the station, watching the sunset paint the mountains in hues of gold and crimson. The peaceful beauty of the landscape stood in stark contrast to the danger and tension of recent days. "What happens now?" Theresa asked, voicing the question that had been on her mind. "Do we continue to Santa Fe as planned?" Caleb nodded. "It's still our safest option. My cousin there is expecting us, and the city is large enough to offer anonymity while we establish ourselves." He turned to face her, taking her hands in his. "But before we move forward, there's something we need to resolve between us." Theresa met his gaze steadily, sensing the importance of this moment. "Our arrangement," she said softly. "Yes," Caleb took a deep breath. "When I found you in those woods, I offered marriage as protection, a legal shield against Vernon's claims. It was a practical solution to an immediate problem." "It was," she agreed, "and I accepted for equally practical reasons. But things have changed," he continued. "At least they have for me." His hands tightened gently around hers. "I love you, Theresa, not out of obligation or duty, but because of who you are, your courage, your kindness, your strength. I want our marriage to be real, not just on paper." The declaration, spoken with his characteristic straightforwardness, brought tears to Theresa's eyes. In the months since their hasty wedding, what had begun as an arrangement of convenience had transformed into something neither had anticipated: a genuine partnership based on mutual respect, growing affection, and shared hardship. "I love you too, Caleb," she whispered, the words coming naturally despite all her previous fears about trusting again. "You showed me what a true partnership could be, one built on respect and equality." Joy illuminated his face as he drew her closer. "Then let's begin again," he suggested. "Not as people bound by circumstance, but as husband and wife who choose each other freely." In response, Theresa rose on tiptoe and kissed him, not the hesitant, careful kisses they had shared before, but one filled with promise and newfound certainty. Caleb's arms encircled her, holding her as if she were precious beyond measure, his response tender yet passionate. When they finally parted, breathless in the fading light, Theresa rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never thought I could feel this way again," she admitted. "After Vernon, I believed that part of me was broken forever." "Nothing about you is broken, Theresa," Caleb said softly, his hand gently stroking her hair. "Wounded, perhaps, but healing stronger than before." They stood together as darkness fell, watching stars emerge in the clear mountain sky, their future uncertain in details, but secure in foundation. Whatever challenges lay ahead, legal battles, establishing a new life, perhaps someday returning to Texas. They would face them together, not out of obligation, but by choice. 3 months later, a letter arrived at Broken Spoke Ranch addressed to Mr. Edgar Holloway. Inside was a brief note from Caleb, informing his former employer that he and Theresa were safely established in Santa Fe, where Caleb had found work as a carpenter, and Theresa was teaching at a small school. They had renewed their wedding vows before a local minister, this time with full hearts rather than practical necessity. The letter also contained news that Mrs. Winthrop's persistent legal efforts had borne fruit. The district court in San Antonio had reviewed Judge Parker's ruling and found serious procedural errors, referring the case to a special judicial panel. Vernon's influence, it seemed, did not extend beyond Bandra County. Most significantly, the letter included a daguerreotype photograph of Caleb and Theresa standing together before their small adobe home, their expressions conveying a contentment that transcended the medium's limitations. Theresa held a small bouquet of wildflowers, echoing a traditional bride's posture, while Caleb stood beside her with quiet pride. Mr. Holloway studied the image with satisfaction before calling Lucy to show her that her former tutor was indeed well and happy. The young girl's delight confirmed what he already knew, that sometimes the most unlikely beginnings could lead to the most perfect endings. In Santa Fe, as spring brought new growth to the high desert landscape, Theresa stood in the doorway of their home, watching Caleb work in their small garden. The morning light caught the silver threads beginning to appear at his temples, evidence of the stress they had endured, but also of the passing seasons of their life together. From inside came the soft cooing sounds of their 3-month-old daughter, Elena, napping in her cradle, an unexpected blessing that had arrived 9 months after their arrival in New Mexico. Her birth had sealed their new beginning, creating a family forged not through legal documents, but through love freely given and received. As Caleb looked up and smiled at her, Theresa reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a terrified woman fleeing through dark woods to a wife and mother building a new life, her path had been neither straight nor easy. Yet she wouldn't change a single step, for each had led her toward this moment, toward home, toward family, toward love. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked as he approached, brushing soil from his hands. Theresa smiled, reaching out to touch his face gently. "I was thinking about that night in the woods, how frightened I was, how lost, and then you found me." His eyes softened at the memory. "Best thing I ever did, finding you." He won't find you here, he had promised that night. And he had kept that promise, not just by protecting her from Vernon, but by helping her create a life where fear no longer defined her choices. As they stood together in the doorway of their home, their daughter's soft sounds drifting on the morning air, Theresa knew with absolute certainty that she had found something far more precious than mere safety. She had found belonging. She had found purpose. She had found love. And in the end, that made all the difference.